Mr. President. This amendment, I sent an amendment to the desk that's an important amendment. This amendment will constrain the growth of this domestic spending program. My amendment is fairly simple. It tightens the nexus between TAA benefits and actual jobs lost because of trade. It does this by changing the eligibility criteria from one that only requires that trade, quote, contribute importantly, unquote, to job loss for a more restrictive criteria that the job loss be, quote, substantially caused, unquote, by trade. Under the current program, a worker only has to demonstrate that imports from or shifts in production to a foreign country, what normal folks would call the ordinary course of business, quote, contributed importantly, unquote, to their job loss. So what does, quote, contributed importantly, unquote, actually mean? Well, the TAA program holds that the contributed importantly standard is met if trade is a cause which is important but not necessarily more important than any other cause of the job loss. That does not sound like a tight nexus to me, certainly not a tight nexus to trade to me. And believe me, these fears are not theoretical. Let me give you a real-life example. I'm sure by now everyone here is familiar with Solyndra, the now bankrupt solar firm that was lauded by President Obama as the poster child for his stimulus and green jobs plan. Well, it turns out that now that Solyndra is in bankruptcy, many of its employees are applying for job training benefits through TAA. To fully understand this lunacy, let's take a look at recent history. Here's how Vice President Biden described the administration's ill-considered plan to direct over $500 million taxpayer dollars to loan guarantees for Solyndra. Quote, "The Recovery Act is working, and you're going to see it work right on that site," unquote. Quote, "The loan to Solyndra will allow you to build a new manufacturing facility and with it almost immediately generate 3,000 new well-paying construction jobs. And once your facility opens, there will be about 1,000 permanent new jobs here at Solyndra and in the surrounding business community, and hundreds more to install your growing output of solar panels throughout the country," unquote. Well, that didn't quite happen. Instead, the firm failed, potentially taking over $500 million taxpayer dollars with it, and those, quote, permanent new jobs, unquote, well, not quite. The workers are all unemployed because their, quote, permanent, unquote, jobs no longer exist. It gets worse. According to the Wall Street Journal, the stimulus loans themselves were a major cause of Solyndra's bankruptcy. Here's the headline: "Loan was Solyndra's undoing." Let me just point to this chart here, this first chart, where it says, "Government loan was Solyndra's undoing." In selling the $500 million loan to Solyndra, Vice President Biden made it clear that these were the jobs of the future, saying, and I quote, "We are journeying in a sense closer and closer to the sun, to a more solar-powered America. And as we do, we're leaving a shadow of a less efficient, more damaging past behind us," unquote. We all know, or should know, what happened to the arrogant Icarus when he flew too close to the sun. So despite the Vice President's exhortations, what happened to Solyndra? Solyndra is set to become an even bigger drain on our taxpayers. How is that possible? Through the magic of TAA, of course. It turns out that the now unemployed former Solyndra employees have applied for trade adjustment assistance. The irony here is profound. The administration is now considering whether to grant these Solyndra workers, because competition from China, quote, contributed importantly, unquote, to their job loss. Well, they want to determine whether to grant to these Solyndra workers TAA benefits. Now, that's just ridiculous. Frankly, here's another Wall Street Journal article entitled, "Solyndra was always likely to fail." You can see what a beautiful plan it was with all of your taxpayer dollars. In a letter to the editor in the Wall Street Journal, the CEO from another solar company, Tech Solar, explained that everyone in the solar business knew that Solyndra's business model wouldn't work and their solar technology was too costly. That didn't stop the White House from giving this company a $535 million taxpayer loan, money that's basically gone now. This was despite the fact that the government's own analysts accurately predicted months ago that Solyndra would fail in September. Well, it did. And look at that beautiful building, built with taxpayer dollars. It's pretty hard to not admire it, to be honest with you. The fact that TAA benefits are even being considered for Solyndra shows how tenuous the nexus between job loss and trade can be, and workers can still get these expanded benefits on top of unemployment insurance. How can Solyndra workers get TAA when the business collapsed due to a bad business plan and an ill-conceived loan of taxpayer money? What was the cause of Solyndra going under? China imports under the current TAA program, however, might be construed by ambitious Department of Labor bureaucrats to have, quote, contributed importantly, unquote, to Solyndra shutting down, despite the fact that the primary cause was the business model and the government's intervention. This needs to stop. We can do better. If we're going to continue to fund this domestic program, let's at least make sure that its benefits go to those workers whose job loss is actually caused by trade. That is what this amendment will do. It will return the TAA threshold standard to the, quote, substantial cause, unquote, level. It would require that trade would have to be a, quote, substantial cause, unquote, of the work dislocation. This standard was included in reforms advocated for by President Reagan that were included in the Bipartisan Omnibus Reconciliation Act of 1981. That Deficit Reduction Act included the largest package of spending cuts in history at that time. President Reagan had noted the unfairness of treating one class of workers who lose their job due to foreign competition better than his neighbor who lost his job due to domestic competition. So he tightened the threshold criteria to be eligible for the TAA program. By returning to the narrower TAA threshold, this amendment would put reasonable constraints on the program to prevent it from expanding to another out-of-control spending program like Solyndra. So I ask my colleagues to support this amendment because I think it makes sense. There's no question it'll save taxpayer dollars. It'll make people act more honestly with regard to the use of taxpayer dollars. And in the end, I think we'll work a lot better than the current approach that my friends on the other side would like to have. Mr. President, I notice that the distinguished senator from North Dakota is here, and I'll yield the floor.